we have this wonderful passage from the 3rd chapter of the Gospel of John. And it puts before us some tremendous information about the choice between the dark and the light. The verses I'm focusing upon is verse 19 and verse 22. The first of these says, "The light has come into the world." The second of these says, "But people love the darkness rather than the light because their deeds were evil." And then at the last it says, "But those who live by the truth will come into the light, so that their deeds that they have done, it will be plainly seen that they have been done in the presence of God." These are the 3 verses I want to focus upon today. And I want to open your minds and hearts to what the gospel says to us about this choice between darkness and light. First of all, the light has come into the world. We must think clearly about this. When did the light come into the world? Most people would answer, "Oh, well, the light came into the world when Jesus was born." Not so. At the very beginning, God said, "Let there be light." And He wasn't talking about the sun and the stars and the moons. God was talking about a light that makes everything in life transparent, makes everything in life clear. The light God was talking about was the light of His love. And that came into the world at the day of creation. The light that makes everything clear and transparent. What God really wants in this life of ours, in this world of ours, is to be loved just like He is loved. God has loved us from the beginning and continues to love us and will always love us. This is the will of the universe. This is the will of life, that all creatures come to bow down to love in this world. And so it is that the light came into the world, and the light was love. But sometimes we don't realize what that really means. I have a little story that I call dog tennis. In the summertime, my parents and I would take trips. I was about the age of these Church of the Future people over here. I was 10 years old, and my brother had a special assignment. Now, my brother was 21 years older than me, you have to understand. And he was already married and had a child. And so anyway, at 10, we heard that he had a special appointment to study botany and biology. That was his specialty at a university in Minnesota. And so we decided to take a road trip from Texas to Minnesota to see my brother. And I was excited because I get to see my 2 nephews. I was 10 years old, and they were about 7 or 8, 6 years old. I was Uncle Phil, and they were my nephew. It's kind of strange, I know. But that's the way it was. And we'd play together. And I look forward to playing with them. I don't remember much about Minnesota, except that the mosquitoes were really big. And the food was kind of bland. But nonetheless, we went up there and we were looking forward to playing together. My brother had gotten some tennis rackets and a tennis ball. Now, none of us played tennis, not one of us, not at all. Never played it in our family. But he got this racket and these balls. And he took us over to the free tennis court at the university. And so we decided we'd make up a game, because we didn't know how to play tennis. So we made up a game called dog tennis. And the idea was you would hit the ball over to the other side, and they could hit it back no matter how many times it bounced around. That was okay. It didn't make any difference. But if they couldn't hit it back, they had to go fetch. And we did a lot of go fetching. So we decided to call it dog tennis. We had a fun time playing, and it was really nice. And a couple of days later, we were getting to know the area pretty well, and our parents took us out on a boring trip to see some 6-leaf weed that my brother was all excited about. And we had to walk through the forest and go out there. It was just a miserable time for me and my nephews. We couldn't wait to get back to play some dog tennis. Well, we didn't get back till about 6 o'clock, and then we had to have supper. And being from Texas, I knew that the sun was going to set sometime pretty soon, you see. And so I rushed my nephews. We just gobbled up the dinner because we wanted to get out there and play some dog tennis before it got dark. We got out to the tennis court, we played the first game, and it was over, and it was a great game. We were excited about it. But the sun was not gone. So we decided to play another game. And the sun was still not gone. And so we played I don't know how many games until we were so tired we couldn't even stand it anymore. And you know, the sun was still there. It was a mystery to me coming from Texas in my little 10-year-old brain. How can this be? And when we got back to the dormitory where our parents was, I saw the hall clock and it said 10 p.m. This was in July. And I couldn't believe the sun would still be up at that time of day. So the next morning when we got up, and it seemed like we got up awful early for breakfast. It's like 5 o'clock in the morning. I couldn't understand that. And you know, it looked like daylight outside. So finally I asked my father and my brother, I said, what's the deal here? And they explained to me my first great theological understanding. The sun always shines. Wow. You mean it doesn't set? I thought the sun set and then the moon came. Yeah, right? That's what we always think. But they taught me this lesson that the sun always shines. It's always shining. It never stops shining. It's just that the earth kind of moves away from it and darkness comes and the earth moves back into it and sunlight comes. But the truth is, the sun always shines. And if you could keep up with the sun, if you could follow the sun, if you could just keep working with the sun and just keep going with the sun, you could play all the dog tennis you wanted to play forever. The point of my story is God's love is always shining. It doesn't go away. It doesn't set. It is always in this world. There's always an opportunity to meet God's love. There's always an opportunity to give God's love. There's always an opportunity to be in the light of God's love. It doesn't go anywhere. If anybody goes anywhere, we go someplace. But God's love is in the world. Always has been in the world. Always will be in the world. And we are the ones who need to know that. The love of God, the light of God has come into the world. And it doesn't go away. It's there. It's what makes life transparent. This is what you should be about. If you're not, it's darkness. Well, that brings us to the second verse we have here today. But people loved darkness more than the light, because their deeds were evil. What does that mean? What is the relationship between darkness and evil? What is the relationship between loving the darkness and evil deeds? What does all of that mean? What is that about? What is the Lord trying to teach us through these words of His about darkness and why people love the darkness? Well, I have another little story. As you all probably know if you've been here long enough to listen to my life story, I grew up out in West Texas, in a little place called Flower Grove where there were no flowers. And we only had two houses, my house and the house of the caretaker for the school. My mother and father were school teachers. My father was superintendent of the schools. And it was a big school, but in West Texas, kids came from 50 miles away to the school. So anyway, we grew up out there in that sandy, dusty area. And it was a cowboy culture. This was in West Texas in the 50s. It was a cowboy culture. And I grew up in that cowboy culture. And by the time I was 5 years old, I had a cowboy hat. I had a fringed jacket. I had a holster with a wooden gun. And I had these boots that were too big for me. I just wobbled around in them. But I looked like a cowboy, really. And I felt like a cowboy. And my heroes were all cowboys. Roy Rogers, the Lone Ranger. And on TV I would watch them. And on movies I would watch them. Of course, there was the big one that I always loved to watch, John Wayne, you know. How great he was as a cowboy. And so they became my idols. They became what I wanted to emulate. I wanted to be a cowboy like them. And I loved to watch the movies when they would come into the saloon, you know, and they push those doors open and they walk across like this, you know, and they come up to the bar and they slap down some money and say, "Give me some whiskey." And the barkeeper would say, "Here it is." I loved that. And I so much wanted to do that in my life. But one day, I was looking under the kitchen sink and I was trying to find a short stick because I needed a rifle, you know? And I didn't have a rifle. So I found the toilet plunger. It makes kind of a good rifle. The end of it's a little funny, but I was all excited about that. And then all of a sudden, over behind the plunger back in the back, I saw something that amazed me. It was a whiskey bottle. My father must have taken a little sip from time to time. And it was hidden back there. And with that bottle, I found this little bitty glass. I thought I'd hit the mother lode. But about that time, I heard my mother coming into the house, so I quickly pushed it all back and took the plunger and said, "Look what I got, a rifle." She thought that was real cute. And so that went on. And I was just waiting for a more opportune time. It was in my head and my mind. I got to fulfill this fantasy. I got to make sure I get a chance to fulfill this dream I have in my life. And it came. One day my mother and father had to go to a conference at the school in the afternoon. It was only for a couple of hours, but they told me, said, "Now son, you stay here by yourself." Oh, that's it. That's what I need to hear. By myself. We'll be back. Don't worry. Now don't go outside. Oh, no, I'm not going to go outside. So they went off. And there I was in the house by myself with a whiskey bottle and a little glass. Oh, did I dream of what I wanted to do. So quickly I went and I put on my cowboy outfit, had my hat, got my little gun thing on. I was all got my wobbly boots on. And I went and I got that bottle out from the back, set it up on the counter, got the little glass, set that up on there. I was prepared. And the great thing was we had this swinging door into the kitchen. The fantasy was becoming real. So I swung open that door, you know, and I could hear the rinky-tink piano playing. And I swaggered up to the bar. And I reached into my pocket. I'd gotten a little nickel out of my piggy bank. And I put it up on the table. And I said, "Whiskey, barkeep." And of course I had to play the barkeep because he wasn't there. And he said, "Coming right up." And then the barkeep took the bottle and poured that golden whiskey into that little bitty glass. And I felt like John Wayne or somebody. And so I took that glass and I looked at that golden whiskey in there. And then, like I'd seen in the movies, I said, "Oh, I'm going to do it exactly like I did." I cocked back my head and well, that's when reality broke my fantasy. Whoa! It was like drinking liquid fire. Had no taste, but boy, did it burn and hurt. And my eyes started watering and I started coughing. Had to go get a glass of water and drink that. I was real disappointed in myself. What kind of a cowboy is this? What kind of a cowboy can't drink his whiskey? And I felt kind of down about it. And after I finished coughing and I decided to myself, one more time I'm going to do it. So I got my nickel back and I walked in again. I come up, "Barkeep, whiskey." And of course the barkeep poured it up for me and I drank that whiskey down. Oh, this time it was not as bad. It went down a little bit smoother, but I was still coughing a little bit. But you know, I was happy. I said, at least I didn't just kind of die and make a fool of myself. And so I was kind of content. And as I was basking in my glory and thinking about what a great thing it was that I had just drunk these 2 jiggers of whiskey, I heard my parents coming in the front door. Oh, no, they cannot see this. This would be very bad. And so I started to reach for the whiskey bottle, but it kept like moving, it seemed like. I finally got a hold of it, and I started trying to put it under the sink, knocked over the bleach bottles, the dishwasher. I put it down under there, and I quickly put the glass under there, and I shut it off. And as they were coming in the door, I thought, what am I going to do here? So I staggered off to my bedroom. I must have been the funniest sight in the world, the first 5-year-old drunk cowboy. But I got into my room and I came up with a decision. I said, I got to do something. So I want to change my clothes right quick and get into my Mickey Mouse pajamas. And I'm going to get into bed. And so that's what I did, quickly. And I got in there and my stomach was beginning to feel kind of strange, actually. And I was about ready to throw up, I thought, and the room was kind of going this way and that way. But my mother comes in, she says, oh, honey, what's wrong with you? And I said, oh, Mama, my stomach don't feel so good. And let me tell you, she immediately ran to the bathroom and got the cure-all of all cure-alls, the big pink bottle of Pepto-Bismol. And to me, the thought of taking Pepto-Bismol on top of 2 jiggers of whiskey was just about all I could stand. But I thought to myself, if this is the price of keeping it secret from my father, because he's going to be real upset when he sees what I did, bring on the Pepto-Bismol. And I took it, and then I kind of passed out after that. I tell you this story for one simple reason. Why did I want to hide that? Why did I want to hide? Why did I want to go into the darkness? Because it wasn't what my father wanted me to do. You know, I knew that. I knew I should have done something better, but it wasn't what my father wanted me to do, and I knew he would probably be angry and upset with me. And in those days, they used the belt when the father was upset. And so I was just like, got to hide this thing, got to hide this thing. And I hid it for about 2 days until they figured out, once they looked under the sink, what all happened. But the point is this, though. This is what the human race does. We love darkness because it gives us a chance to hide the kind of life we're living. That's why we love darkness. We like it because it gives us a chance to hide the kind of life we're living. Not that we're sipping our deadliest whiskey, but what we're doing is we're living that kind of life of trying to fulfill our fantasies. Trying to fulfill our fantasies rather than the will of our Father God. We got all kinds of fantasies. Oh, I want to do this. I want to do that. I want to be this. I want to be that. And we just fill our lives up with fantasies, trying to act out what we have seen others do, trying to act out what we think life is all about, when it's not about what God wants it to be about. And in our hearts, we know it's not what God wants us to be about. And so our fantasies get us into trouble, and the trouble is what we want to hide from our God, our Father, and so we love the darkness. We love it because we choose not to live in the light, because we love our fantasies. And if it means being a cowboy drinking whiskey, that's what we'll do, you see. So, that's the second point for today. The third point is this last verse. And here's where the good news comes in. It's a great, great good news. But those who live by the truth, those who live by the truth will come into the light, so that it may be clearly seen that what they have done in the sight of God. Nothing to hide, nothing to look bad upon. What I've done in the sight of God because I have believed in the truth. That life in the light is better than light in the darkness. Final story I have for you this morning is called Aaron's Arm. Some of you may have lived in Utah from time to time, recently perhaps. And you may know the story of Aaron Ralston. And if I tell it to you, you're all going to remember it because it was in the news. It was all over the TV. Aaron was a young man who loved to go hiking and mountain climbing. He was a true outdoorsman. And he had gone to Utah to get away from climbing mountains in Colorado. And he decided to go on a hike one morning in an area called Blue John Canyon. An isolated area, very, very, very isolated area in Utah. He loved to be by himself, the solitude, the quiet. And so he went out on a beautiful Utah morning, and everything was going beautiful, and his hike was going wonderfully, and he was enjoying himself immensely, until he didn't see a ravine that he was stepping near with loose stones, and he stepped on a loose stone, and he slid down in this ravine. But that wasn't the bad thing. He set loose an 800-pound boulder that come crashing down toward him. And so he put out his hand, not a wise thing, but to try to stop this 800-pound boulder, and it crushed his hand against the side wall, so that his hand was literally pinned there against this wall with an 800-pound boulder. And he was in the middle of nowhere, and nobody knew he had gone. Nobody was going to come looking for him. And there he was. And he tried everything he could to get his hands free, but it was not going to happen. You can't move 800 pounds by yourself, and especially when one hand is not available anymore. And there he was trapped. And for 3 or 4 days, he tried to survive with what little water he had and a little bit of a sandwich, and he ate that. And he just tried to think about what he could do to get out of this situation. He was becoming delirious from dehydration. He was actually even drinking his own urine eventually. And it was the 4th day, and he was beginning to think that this is the end of it all. I'm going to die out here. So he reached into his pocket with his other hand, and he pulled out this multi-tool thing that he had, which had a knife on it and a screwdriver and things of that nature. And he began to carve his name in the stone, and he carved his birthday in there. And he carved a little message to his parents in there. And then he remembered he had a video camera in his backpack. And he started making these videos, telling everybody he knew how much he loved them and how sorry he was, but he wasn't going to be in the world anymore. He had given up. He had decided that his life was over. But on the 5th day, he woke up from his delirium. He heard a crow calling in the wilderness that kind of woke him up. And he looked at the situation, still the same. His hand was smushed under the... Still the same. Nothing had changed. But then he had what he calls in his book, and I love the title of his book, Between a Rock and a Hard Place. A great title and a great book if you want to have a good read about survival. And in that book he said it was a divine inspiration. He looked at his arm and his hand, and he realized that his hand had died. And his arm had died up here. Because there's no more circulation. Totally dead. He took the knife and he stabbed it. Felt nothing. Nothing. And so he decided, I can cut my arm off. I can cut it off and I can survive. And he started to cut, but right before he stabbed his arm, he thought about the bone. All I got is this little pocket knife. How am I going to cut through that bone? How am I going to get through that? I can cut the arm, but I can't get rid of the bone. And then another divine inspiration came to him. I can take a stone, one of these big stones down here, and I can break the bone. Break it. Break it completely free from my arm. And so he crushed it, and then he took the pocket knife and cut off the rest of his arm. And he was free. Free at last. Free from the dead arm. Free from its death and its hold on him. And he put a tourniquet on already, and he wrapped up his arm. And the rest of the story is an amazing adventure of him getting back to civilization. I won't go into all of that. But the point is, this man was willing to cut off his arm in order to live. You see, this is the decision we need to make in our lives. We have this choice to continue to be attached to everything that is dead in our life. To continue to be attached to these dead dreams, these dead activities, these things that are only a waste of time, these things that don't amount to anything. We can choose to still be attached to those things and think that it's so important that we be attached to those things. Or we can realize that if we're going to have true life, if we're really going to live in the light, if we're really going to be free at last from the death that is holding us back, got to cut off the arm. That's the only decision. Got to break the bone and cut off the arm. Jesus put it this way: if your eye offends you, pluck it out. If your hand offends you, cut it off. The idea is you've got to make a decision between life and death. You've got to decide that acts of love and being involved with other people, helping those who need help, helping those who need renewal and relief, you've got to decide, is that more important than your fantasies? Which is it? Which will you do? The gospel teaches us the good news, that we can walk in the light if we live by the truth. And the truth is this: the sun is the only thing, the love of God is the only thing shining in this world. It's the only true thing. Darkness is a shadow. Darkness is an illusion. If you want to walk in reality, walk with those who serve others. Walk with those who sacrifice their lives for others. Walk with those who deny themselves. Then you'll be walking in the light. And then you'll be walking with God. And then you will be free at last. Because as the gospel says to us, the light has come into the world, but people love darkness rather than light because their deeds were evil. But those who live by the truth shall come into the light. And what they have done, it will be plainly seen that they have done it in the presence of God. Amen.